Listen, I'll talk to you about any show and all the shows, but when you mentioned Voss, I was like, "Oh, you picked a goodie." So that's what we're gonna talk about today. I mean, that
Okay.
show, okay, there's so much to unpack.
Yes.
So let's just dive in and talk about this particular show. I think it holds so much power for many different reasons, from the time, from the cast of characters, the set, the fashion. I mean, there's a lot here. So let's dive in. Why did you choose Voss? I'm curious to know that.
Well, it is interesting, and I'm not usually one for popularism, but when you ask, like my followers on Instagram, Voss usually does almost immediately go up to the very top. And it's understandable. I think in the context of the timing within McQueen's personal career and what was going on with fashion at the time, the entire shifting of sands with the big corporate players, who he was a part of, his time at Givenchy. It's a really interesting crossroads, I suppose, for his career and what he was doing in terms of his design aesthetic, as well as some of the commentary it makes on socio-political aspects of what's going on in the world. So it's just, it is a very powerful show for many reasons, and it evokes a very visceral response for people for very different reasons. This is spring summer 2001, and shown in London during Fashion Week there. This was also at the very end of McQueen's time at Givenchy, so he is just about ready to depart. So he's doing both collections for himself in London and for Givenchy in Paris at the time. So it's a bumpy moment, but I love that for everything McQueen may not have necessarily been hitting right on the head at Givenchy, he was actually sifting through and gaining knowledge and bringing it back and pumping it into his own brand. So you kind of see things there really start to evolve really quickly. So if there were shows that were kind of like, huh, what? At Givenchy, it was having the opposite effect at McQueen in London.
This show, you could
Yes.
see the mental health, the beauty and the luxury, the brashness. It tells this complex story. Who was the set designer?
His artistic director at the time was Joseph Bennett, who is now obviously a very famous movie director and creative director. Katie England, of course, creative director, genius as she is. So, with those two together, their usual production team of Gainsbury and Whiting, John Gosling on sound, you've got all of your accessories designers that are in the mix there. So, it's a full force McQueen thrown at everything with all the bells and whistles.
The premise of the box, though, let's go back to that. I find that really interesting. It was a box within a box.
Yeah, I think, going with probably what most people recognize it to be is, the padding on the inside looking somewhat asylum-esque. The lighting, the way it was set up, is quite stark on the inside, quite kind of shockingly lit.
Look 10 is really interesting.
So I suppose you could certainly make the connection that that is his version of a straitjacket, which this is
Oh.
also where there's a huge Japanese influence that has crept through the collection. You've got like subtopic on top of subtopic on top of subtopic, and the hat is kind of an extension of some of the stuff that he did at Givenchy as well. So it's just another one of those moments where everything perfectly comes together. If you strip all of the show stuff away, you strip away the styling and everything, the clothes are really simple, actually. They're not overtly decorated. They're not super complicated. There is diversity in cut. There is asymmetry. There's all of these kind of interesting kind of pull of tension of, kind of like traditional masculine tailoring details that have been slightly askewed. Or you see asymmetrically cut jackets that might be only on one side. I have an interview with him where he talks about they were trying to do innovative things with fabric and cut. I know specifically talks about creating diffused wool that actually, as it moves down the leg of the trouser, it actually becomes transparent. So it's opaque at the top and then it's transparent by the time it hits the knee. And so they were doing all kinds of different new things.
So, are you talking about the actual fabrics and the use of non-fabric materials to create things that makes it innovative?
All of it. So it's kind of like a non-ending, you know, kind of dossier of different materials that they used. Jade Parfit's taxidermy birds that are kind of flying around her. There's all kinds of materials that aren't necessarily associated with regular fashion design. Kate Moss comes out in a green jersey dress, and it has like a transparent shoulder strap, and it's literally just draped to the waist, but it kind of falls in kind of like the sack-like shape to the waist, and then creates kind of like a really beautiful fluid shape when she walks. And it's really, really simple clothing with a very quite masterful editing done to it, to where it doesn't sacrifice any of the impact.
So in context to this show, if you take all his shows, and maybe this is not a fair question.
It's already not. I can already tell where you're going. It's not fair.
How do I ask this? In relation to importance, to context of life and the moments and the zeitgeist, where would this show rank?
Oh, definitely top 3 for sure of McQueen's work. Yeah, absolutely. The subject matter, the design, the setting, the actual show itself, what it stood for, what it represents, the impact that it had on fashion as a whole. And I don't mean like, am I going to see my mom wearing that? I'm talking about how fashion shows were looked at and what they could do, the message that they could convey. And even if we look back at things now in the context of the knowledge that we have and how we try to observe things, given folks that are oppressed or subject matter that's sensitive or things that we want to think about, mental health, things like that, in that moment, what he was trying to do, the way it was conveyed probably is very of that time, but what he was trying to do is very forward thinking, trying to get folks to kind of not think about fashion as it is typically seen in 2001.
The looking beyond fashion as the superfluous, shallow entity, and holding the depth and meaning and the duality and the power of what it holds.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you said this was top 3. Who is this ranking with? What are the other 2 shows?
Oh, good grief. Again, this is just personal for me in terms of kind of, I don't know, what he did. I would probably say 2009's Horn of Plenty in terms of kind of the social commentary again, and also the overall show. And then probably Highland Rape, because of the impact that it had and kind of I don't know, I always think of a thunder crack when I think of Highland Rape, because it was like, wow, that is very controversial. And you've got someone that has something to say. And it's a super, super sensitive subject matter, but that was also the point. You've got someone trying to point out something that can convey a message through what they do. It just happens that the medium was fashion design. Yeah.
It's still so relevant to today. All his work to me really is still super relevant. But this particular show, we're still battling with the same issues: mental health, beauty standards, distorting yourself and your body to fit into social norms. I mean,
Yes.
very relevant. I think the accessories are such an important part of this collection, as is the fashion, as is the models and the set and and everything else. They create this sort of fantasy storytelling piece that I think makes it come alive.
Yes.
And almost the headpieces of the wrappings kind
Yes.
of go with these accessories.
Well, it's really cool because they also use cosmetic tape. So all of the models' faces are pulled, right? So they have tape that kind of pulls their eyes back. So it kind of distorts the way that the face looks. It's the reason why I have such a hard time figuring out who all modeled in the show, is because there's only certain models you can tell who they are. But then also Val Garland used a very minimal style of makeup to where it's just kind of like blush. The eyes are a bit whited out. There's no really lip color. And so it is this kind of strange, kind of fresh, raw human that you're just left with kind of no decoration, but it's kind of pulled and bandaged and taped. So there's medical kind of vibe to it. And then going back, of course, to, again, how you would expect a patient to look somewhat.
You're right, like facelift.
Yeah.
This is clearly plastic surgery, facelift. I don't know why I missed that. I just thought mental patient.
Yeah, again, it's that perception of beauty. Like, Is it beauty you're aspiring to? Is it beauty that you've tried to achieve through other means?
Right.
Is it beauty that you naturally have? So yeah, it's all of that kind of in a different package. Yes.
Yeah, this is why I love McQueen. He's always really pushed the boundaries of what beauty means and creating that dialogue in such a powerful artistic way. So I'm just wondering why, and maybe there's no answer to this question. Why haven't we seen more shows in the world like this? Is McQueen the only person that could make a show like this?
I think now it's not possible anymore, unfortunately, because for everything that he did, you automatically would have someone offended and would be canceling it. And that's not to invalidate why they would feel that way. I don't want to put that out there. But what I would say is, I don't think those moments will happen like that in fashion anymore. And that's not to be a retro fanatic or to, oh, it was so good back then. It's not that at all. It's just fashion isn't that deep anymore. It doesn't have the same impact that it does now. The creator can be very impactful, the person behind it and what they do, what they believe, and what they stand for, but you can't make shows like this anymore.
Has anyone ever tried to do a replication of his shows, even his top 3?
I mean, I'm sure people have copied parts of it.
No, but like a replica. Could you
Oh,
imagine?
gosh, I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I don't, because even when institutions try to recreate his scenography or make you feel kind of like you're in a McQueen show, you have to have all of the elements there. You have to have the sound, you have to have the production, you have to have Philip Tracy, you have to have Sean Lean, you have to have Sarah Harmony, you have to have Katie England. Like, those elements were there to make what it did and make it do what it did. You can't separate those things from it. He
Right.
was the nucleus, all the other players were part of it, and you take any piece of that together and it's different. So
And for me, rather than challenging these beauty norms that are so limited and divisive, he celebrates. So,
and as I'm sure everyone probably knows, the finale that opens and the glass smashes onto the floor and you have the writer and creator Michelle Ollie in the kind of scene recreating one of the photographer and artist Joel Peter Witkin's famous works from the 80s that he created, which McQueen was a huge fan of, called Sanitarium, I think it is. She says herself, the fashion world's biggest fear, a fat woman ending a show with tubes in her mouth, recreating this tableau from this artist's work, and, live butterflies bursting out as the glass breaks down. So it was a kind of a breathtaking literal moment in fashion where everyone was just like, what am I looking at? I don't even understand this. And again, and if you talk to any of the other creators, I know I was lucky enough to speak to Val Garland, and she was like, no, this really is about beauty. Like, what do you think beauty is? So extension to perception and the use of what we see and what we think we see day to day, and how that perception can kind of affect what we believe is to be attractive or something that we find beauty in. So it's a very powerful message wrapped in a fashion show.